How is everyone doing? Strength Chat episode 81, and today I have got a very special guest for you. Today I'm joined by a world-class powerlifter. He's totaled 10 times his body weight in 3 different weight classes. He's also an accomplished author. Today I am joined by Brian Carroll. How are you doing?
Hey, thanks for having me, Stephen. Appreciate it. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you? What have you been up to? What have you been working on at the minute?
Oh man, good question. So recently my wife gave me permission to convert the 3-car garage into a full gym.
Oh, nice.
So that's what I've been working on since the start of the year. I've trained with the same group of people for close to 20 years. And so my friend who had hosted our gym, our powerlifting team for the longest time, he's selling his house. So it was time for the gym to move somewhere. And he'd retired 5 years ago. So it was kind of on me to make something happen. So the wife gave me permission to convert the garage. And so now I have a full setup. Now I've got 2 monoliths in there, 2 competition bench presses, a rack,
Oh, nice.
a platform, 20 different bars. I got 7 pairs of 100-pound plates. I've got kettlebells to 50 kilograms, and I've got dumbbells up to 175 pounds.
Nice.
So I've got a really good start. I also have a really cool – have you ever heard of the Squat Max MD belt squat attachment that goes on the side of your power rack?
No, I've not seen that, no.
Okay, I'll send you a picture or video of it later, but it's an attachment that's only about 3x3 that goes on the side of your rack. And it has this belt squat mechanism that line of drive is straight up and down. So instead of the traditional belt squats that are out in front of you with a lever or pulley, this is directly underneath you, and the bottom of the platform opens up. And so you can keep the same line of drive and the same mechanisms to squat and deadlift. You can do this on the belt squat. So it's the most legitimate piece that I've seen in a long time. And it's my favorite piece in the whole gym, actually.
Oh, nice. It's I must admit at the gym that I'm at, we don't have a belt squat, but I'm always looking. It is one thing that I would quite like to another addition to the gym. I'm sure we'll get into it later on in the podcast, but as an alternative to reduce load through the spine and that sort of stuff, a belt squat would be really good. I'm slightly jealous of your garage gym now that you've mentioned about that, and I'm sure it's always good to get confirmation off the real boss to allow you to do it.
Yeah, the real boss is right. So I've been working on that for the last 6 months, and I've been working on recruiting a couple younger lifters because I'm still competing. I haven't competed very much in the last couple of years, but I still have some numbers that I want to hit, and so the fire's still there. So I've been working on building a team around me. So that's been taking up the last 6 months of my life pretty heavy. I still have a lot of things I want to do at the gym, branding wise. A lot of the time I spent selling, trading, upgrading certain pieces that I didn't like or whatever. So that's what I've been up to this year. I still write for my website, powerlifting.com, and I'm still doing seminars and whatnot. So I've been pretty busy this year. It's been a great year so far.
Oh, good. Do you have any seminars or competitions in mind for the rest of the year later down the line, or what's the plans for the rest of the year?
I'm thinking that I'm going to continue to work on building my crew and my team and my gym and get it the way I want it. And I'm going to invest in other lifters. So when it's time for me to lift, probably early 2020, I'm going to have people around me. Since I've been giving into them, I hope to have that same kind of support, because you can't do powerlifting by yourself at an elite level. You have to have spotters, helpers, coaches, and it takes a full army to be able to do it correctly.
Yeah.
And so I'm just kind of working on that. I don't have a date set for when I want to powerlift. Seminars coming up. I have a couple that are tentative, a couple that might be in China, the UK, and maybe in France.
Oh, nice.
In particular. So we'll have to see how that goes. But so that's really that's it in a nutshell.
Oh, cool. It's interesting you said there about the having a crew around you for powerlifting. I know everyone says it's an individual sport, and that's what you see when the lifters go out on the platform, but everything that's behind the scenes, it's not just a one-man band, if you like. There are other people surrounding that one lifter.
There's a lot that goes into it before they actually get to the platform. The platform is just a finished, polished product.
Yeah.
It isn't the labor along the way that people have to be there for, the eating every day, getting adequate rest, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So for everyone listening who might not know your background or how you got to be in the position that you're in now, just want to give a little bit of a background to yourself?
Sure. What position am I in right now?
Having a horse and carriage gym.
I'm just kidding. So I started competing when I was 17. So I did my first bench competition in June of 1999. So it's been over 20 years ago since I competed. And it was a last minute foray. I kind of jumped in last minute when I saw the competition. I was actually down in Bradenton, Florida, near Tampa, right on the Gulf of Mexico. And there was a bench press meet under a tent. And I went down there to help one of my friends, and I decided to jump in. I got second place out of 4 or so teenagers. And then from there, I was pretty hooked. I did some bodybuilding for a while and didn't really like that. So I kind of went back to powerlifting and then did my first full meet, started training for that in 2001, 2002, and then got on the platform for the first time for a full meet in 2003. And I weighed 220. And my first meet results were 705 squat, a 424 bench, a 622 deadlift, and a 1750-ish total. And for a while, I added 100 pounds onto my total at least every year. And my best total ever is 2730 since at 275. My best squat's 1185. My best bench is 825. And my best deadlift is 850 in the gym, 800 in a competition. So 2730 there. But it wasn't a smooth ride the whole time. Yeah. I had a lot of hiccups along the way. When you're a 20 something, I think I was 25 when I hit my first all-time world record. So within a couple of years of competing in full meets, I had the biggest squat ever done at 220. And I beat Chuck Vogelpohl's 1025 with the 1030 in November 2006. And it's kind of hard to tell anything to a kid that already has the world record, anything. I had a lot of good people around me, but I was also hard-headed. So after a while, you learn, you make mistakes, you do things your way. It doesn't always work out so well. And I ended up getting a very serious back injury that was more cumulative than anything. I mean, there was a couple times where I could point out where I fell. I tweaked something on a deadlift. I tweaked something on a squat, but I never was using the proper mechanics or resources to get it desensitized and pain-free. Yeah. And ultimately, it led to a lot of issues that I had that we'll talk about here soon.
Yeah. So obviously, you mentioned there about the back injury that you had, and you said it was a build up of things. With the as I'm a powerlifter myself, most powerlifters will be lifting to this, and you can sometimes, like you mentioned there, have feel something in a deadlift or feel something in a squat. Can all these little things be prevented, or are there some injuries, like when you had your back injury, was that something that couldn't have been prevented? What's your thoughts on that?
That's $1 million question. So kind of yes, kind of no. Some injuries are going to happen. That's why a lot of the screening for the American Football League, NFL, our football, baseball, hockey, basketball, a lot of these screens are good, but they really can't predict injury when it's on the field or you're under the bar. There's things that are going to happen. Tissue's going to give, things are going to break, things are going to give away. With that said, there's a lot of preventative stuff that I could have been following, and that's stabilizing my core, not bending my spine all the time, because after a while I became flexion intolerant. So I was continuing to move in flexion day to day and wondering why my back was always hurting. So if I would have read Ultimate Back Fitness and Performance, if Back Mechanic was available back in the early 2000s, hopefully I would have heeded the advice and the wisdom that are in those pages, and moved better, stabilized my core, my spine, moved around the pain, let it desensitize. But I didn't do that. I had to learn the hard way.
Yeah. So in terms of that, obviously, since after the injury, what has your sort of warm up or mobility? How has your training changed? And what advice or coaching do you chat with the lifters that you work with to reduce the risk of having injuries or hurting your back?
Yeah, so my actual injury was I had herniated discs or flattened discs at L3, L4, L4, L5, L5, S1, and then I had a nice fracture in my sacrum,
Right.
L5 and L4 and L3, and some retrolisthesis, a couple other things that were going on there. But it was due to my movement patterns. And so the first thing when someone comes to me, I talk to a lot of power lifters about back pain. I think you saw that I'm now a certified provider in Jacksonville, Florida now, which is pretty cool. So I've worked with a lot of power lifters of all levels and people of all levels that want to get pain free. And the biggest thing is they don't move well and they expect to get pain free. You know, McGill's method gets watered down, and it's a real reductionist view to think that McGill procedure is only the McGill big three: the curl up, the bird dog, and the side plank. That isn't it. It's a whole system of code. It's a code that you go by and you do the assessment, you move around the pain, you desensitize. So those are the biggest things that you have to consider for an athlete. What's their lifting age and what's their biological age? How long have they been doing it? And a program needs to be set according to how old they are, what their weak points are, what their strengths are. And that's a good way to go about it. In my book, 1020 Life, it's a straight up strength training book, whereas Gift of Injury, the one I wrote with Stu, is a collaboration between his science, my real world validity, basically our combined 50 something years together. So in 1020 Life is a little more straight up strength training and powerlifting based. And in that book, I talk a lot about a comprehensive warm up, and that's going to depend on what your needs are. So the first thing I suggest is starting with breaking a sweat. Don't get under the bar without a good core temperature and breaking a little bit of a sweat. That's both for mental capacity and physical capacity. So you tap into that, break a sweat, jump rope, jog, walk on the treadmill, do some kettlebell swings. I don't really care.
Yeah.
That's general warm up. Number 2 is stiffen the core. If you're trying to be a strength athlete, core stiffness is something you can't compromise. Yeah. You need core stiffness to be able to unleash the distal athleticism. So stiffen the core at the McGill Big Three. The third part that I suggest, depending on what your ailments are, depending on what your injury history is, and depending on what you're lifting that day, do something that's specific to what you're doing that day. For instance, if you're squatting, maybe work into a goblet squat, or use the lifter's wedge to work down in the hole with an empty bar, either on your back or in your hands, whether you're trying to simulate the deadlift or the squat. And then the last part is simply getting under an empty bar and pumping it out 20 to 40 times just to grease the groove, just to get those joints lubricated and ready to go. We've all seen people that don't do any kind of warm up and just get under the bar and throw, 100 kilos on there, or 225 pounds and 2 plates, and that's not a good way to have sustained athleticism. Eventually, you get to an age or a lifting age that you can't get away with that anymore. And we've all seen the people on the internet that they do all this crazy stuff and they seem like they get away with it forever. The next thing you know, they're crippled and they're done and they're not heard from again.
Yeah, absolutely. It is one of those things. I think, like we said when we started chatting at the start, everyone sees the final product, if you like, of someone lifting their top single or double, or they see them on the platform, but they don't see the warm up that they put in, which is a valuable and important part of the workout. Do you think, just delving that into that a little bit more, when people just come in and just load the bar up, do you think it's a lack of education, if you like, in terms of what they should be doing in a warm-up? Or do you think, like what you mentioned, it'll only get so far until they are going to get an injury? And is it going to be a case of when they have an injury, right, then they need to start, rethinking their warm-up?
Well, it really just depends. Hopefully people in this day and age, there's education everywhere. You can literally learn how to do anything on this planet on YouTube.
Yeah.
anything from fixing a car speaker in your rare car to changing the oil, getting that oil plug or the spark plugs or whatever it is. How to, paint something or whatever, take apart your dishwasher. So there's really no excuse not to be educated because it's free. There's free material everywhere. So most people that come into the gym, I think it's a combination of ignorance, because right now strength training is very mainstream.
Yeah.
They see what their favorite movie star or athlete's doing, and they just want to go in and mimic it, which is silly. Each program needs to be individualized for the person. And there's a lot of things you have to look at when you're programming for an athlete. I think a lot of it's laziness. They want instant self-gratification right away. They don't want to do the behind-the-scenes work like we talked about. They only want to do a highlight reel. So they're not worried about, they don't put as much effort into their warm-up, into their lower sets. They're just waiting for that camera time where they kind of blossom and turn it on. So that's a problem. And it leads to a lot of people getting hurt. And with the diluted strength industry, the way it is right now, there's a lot of bad coaches out there that don't know what the hell they're doing. They've only competed or been in the industry a couple of years, and they're giving advice when, honestly, the first 5 or 6 years, I wasn't going to help anybody because I was just trying to figure out things on my own.
Yeah.
And I had success, but that doesn't mean that I can help others see success.
Yeah.
We see some of the best coaches there are don't have very much physical ability, but they're intelligent. So there's a lot. It's a complex question. I think people get hurt for a variety of reasons. It's laziness, it's lack of planning and following their favorite athletes' protocols, which you can't do that. A lot of these people that you follow have extensive athletic backgrounds, and they're not just jumping into something.
Yeah, absolutely. And the people that those will be following, will have X amount of years training experience. We recently held last year held a seminar, and Eddie Hall came down and did a seminar at the gym, which was awesome. And someone said, "Oh, what's your deadlift? What's your deadlift program?" Now, Eddie Hall, with all of his experience, and anyone who's at the very top, if you like, no one's going to be able to do that to the level that he has. I think everyone's very quick to want it now, whereas before social media and that sort of stuff, you would just be putting the work in the gym and having that. A key thing that I usually try and mention to people is patience. You've got to be patient to get what you want. Yes, you might end up adding, like what you mentioned about adding weight on your total year on year. But as you're getting stronger and heavier, the PBs aren't going to be as big, if you like. In terms of actual what physically causes these injuries, then what have you found to be the key key headlines, if you like, or indicators that are going to lead towards an injury? Because obviously we chatted about, you can feel things in a deadlift or feel things in a squat. What can be caused sort of physically, if you like?
A breakdown in form and fatigue is the culprit a lot of the time. Either not enough warm up or too much warm up, because you can warm up too much, fatigue, and then you're more likely to have a tissue strain or injury if you're fatigued. So, that's bad deadlift form, bad squat form, not understanding how to get tight, proper stiffness, how to create that intra-abdominal pressure to be able to unleash the shoulders and the hips for a power lifter. You don't need to be flexible like a gymnast if you're going to be a power lifter. And Stu talks about you can adapt the spine to be very flexible and be relatively heavy or healthy, or you can adapt it to take load, but you can't mix the two. You should not mix the two. Yeah. So at the end of the day, I see a lot of people trying to be a CrossFitter, or they're trying to be flexible and trying to be strong, and they'll say, well, so-and-so can do a split and they can squat 700 pounds. They're outliers. They're the 0.1 percenters. The average elite athlete is not going to have these type of characteristics. Only the cream of the crop, the top of the top. And eventually they end up paying the price a lot of the time too for having great flexibility and great strength, power, and explosion. So does that answer your question? The deadlift and squat are the most common and just not understanding proper body biomechanics and locking in the spine and not using the lifter's wedge. When we say lifter's wedge, we're talking about posting the pecs, posting the lats, bending the bar, doing a rhomboid squeeze and anti-shrug, where you're locking in all the trunk musculature, and then you're learning how to unleash the hips. And sometimes it takes a little bit of hip mobility, whether it be a goblet squat or a hip airplane or whatever it is that people prefer. There's a lot of different ways to mobilize the hips. And then the shoulders need enough mobility to be able to get in position, just like the hips, but not too much mobility, because then you end up being loose. And that's looseness is the enemy of power.
Yeah, comes back to what you mentioned before about it's specific to that person and what the goal is. So if it's powerlifting, you need to have the movement required for that. In terms of, obviously, chatted there about the deadlift and a breakdown in form and that sort of stuff. With the no one ever walks out and says, "Oh, I've pulled my quad or I've pulled my glute or anything." It's always load on the spine. So in terms of everything surrounding it, and you've mentioned there about the core stability, if you like, how do you go about in terms of the warm up or in terms of cueing exercises to make sure that everything works together to protect the spine rather than putting everything onto your back?
So what exactly are you asking? I'm sorry.
So with the obviously when people have an injury, if a breakdown of form or on a squat or on a deadlift, and they'll hurt the back, how do you get everything in place, either by coaching cues or by using different exercises to make sure that all the load and that breakdown in form isn't just going to put a load of pressure on the spine?
Okay, so sometimes it takes a regression in the lift. So if people are pulling off the floor, well, have you done a hip scour to assess their hips to see how they're built? They might not be structurally built to pull off the floor. So that's why I always start with that. I start with the questionnaire, of course.
Yeah.
Their injury history, whatnot, their lifting background. Then we'll assess the hips with the pelvic rock back, the hip scour to see what they're working with, and that will determine. Maybe we try them in sumo, maybe try them in a hybrid sumo that's not very wide, or we try them in a wide conventional or a narrow conventional. And then some people we start off pulling just below the knee off of blocks because they have to get that form down. So we might start them with some bumper plates below the knee and get them to lock in the lifter's wedge and regress. Other people, it's just a cue, dropping the lats into the back pocket, bending the bar a little bit more. But form has to come before speed and strength. So I'm a real big form Nazi. I'm a big advocate of using proper form, and locking in the head is neutral, packing the neck, making sure that the upper body is locked into one segment, and the lower body is cammed itself and locked in, rooting into the floor, bending the bar, squeezing the glutes. Like, there's no soft spots. That's a big thing that I make sure with the deadlifts. And whether I'm poking them with a stick or poking them with my fingers, making sure they're stiffening their core, pushing out laterally to fill in their belt if they're wearing a belt, or their internal belt that they have. Those are just a couple of things that everyone's a little bit different, but tightness is key. A lot of people don't understand what maximum stiffness and tightness actually is, and it's quite hard to do.
Yeah, absolutely. The majority of people that come to the powerlifting the club that I run are just beginners, and sometimes you can spend a lot of time getting them into a good position, and then as soon as they go to lift the bar or squat the bar, that just all goes. And they've worked so hard to get into that position, and like I mentioned before, it is mainly patience, just thinking, right, let's take time to focus on that setup. So in terms of obviously you mentioned about your injury and the training afterwards. How did your sort of mindset change from having an injury? Because I know some people, when they have an injury, they think, oh, well, I'm not going to get back to squatting or deadlifting, that's it now. So what was your thought process, and what was the plan sort of after you had your injury?
Excuse me. Well, I was at the end when I met McGill in 2013, and he told me that you're done. That's what he said. Quote, "You're done. You have nothing left. There's no athleticism left in your spine." But just before then, he said that I can get you out of pain most likely. And I said, okay, well, you say you can get me out of pain. I'm gonna lift again once I'm pain free. One thing at a time, he said. But if you were my son, I would urge you to not lift heavy anymore because you could be risking permanent injury or worse. Whatever that means. Something really bad. I guess maybe losing use of my legs or something like that. And he said, if you were my son, I urge you to retire. Well, I said, well, I'm going to get back to lifting. He said, one thing at a time. Let's give it 6 months, get out of pain first, and then we'll talk about, the process going forward. And who knows, maybe you're right. Maybe you end up writing a book about it. And that's how the initial conversation went about what became Gift of Injury that we released in October 2017. And so going forward, I knew that my lifting was a gift. And I had taken it for granted many times. So I made sure that I moved well outside of the gym. I can't overemphasize that enough, how important moving well with good spine hygiene. And what do I mean by that? Well, everything that you're doing around the house, taking out the trash, filling the dog food bowl, whatever it may be, everything's cumulative. So you're either investing in your body and making deposits, or you're pulling from your athleticism and making withdrawals. So I was making way too many withdrawals in day-to-day life. The way I'd sit down in a chair, the way I'd lay down on the ground, the way I'd lay in bed, the way I'd bend to pick something up. So I had to clean that up, and I didn't take my lifting for granted anymore. I made sure I stiffened my core. I was doing all the wrong ab exercises before, focusing on crunches and sit-ups and leg raises, when all that was doing was sensitizing my spine and furthering my injury. So the big things would be moving well, stiffening my core, and then becoming really, really adamant about proper form, because that's something that I would get loose on at times. I would take it for granted. I wouldn't turn on until 700 pounds. I would just kind of be coasting until then. And then I got even more specific with the pickiness of exercises. I was very specific going forward. And what I learned from Stu is everything needs to have an exact purpose in your training program, not because your favorite athlete's doing it or you like this exercise. So I became a lot more picky about what exercises I did. And I also didn't go heavy as much. And I took proper deloads every 3 to 4 weeks. I advocate in 10-20 Life and Gift of Injury to have a week where you go 50 or 60% and sharpen up your form. And that way you let those micro fractures in your bones, especially your spine, because when you load them, you create micro fractures. You need to let those heal. So made sure I took a week in between squats and deadlifts to let those things heal, those microfractures heal, and then callus over and rebuild stronger. So specifically for my back, but think about your forearms and your leg bones. They all have cumulative load over time. So having every 3 to 4 weeks have a lighter week is just kind of a way to keep me honest.
Yeah, it's interesting there. You mentioned about exercise selection and everything that happens, outside of the gym and day to day. I think that is often overlooked, and especially for me. So, last year I competed at my first British national powerlifting championships. This year will be my second year, and I have realised that everything. When you are going into those training days, everything else does have an effect on it. For example, recently I've moved house. I moved around the living room and all that sort of stuff. Thought, I'll go in and train. I was absolutely knackered. It did not help. It did not help that session at all. Moving sofas around and that sort of stuff. I think people sometimes neglect that a little bit. So in terms of obviously everything that's happening outside of it and movement, as the recovery in terms of training afterwards, what was the process in terms of the actual training, and how were you? Did you have days where you just work on mobility and then you try and do some more of the more specific exercises? What was the plan sort of after that?
Once I got pain free?
Yeah.
What was the process? Yeah. So it started with a very, very low intensity. So it started with kettlebell goblet squats, kettlebell swings, lots of carries, lots of walking, lots of McGill 3. And then eventually I went from a kettlebell goblet squat to a front squat. And then from the front squat, I went to a back squat, and I just started with the bar. The first week back, I started with the empty bar. The first week back on the deadlift, I started with the empty bar. And I just listened to my body, slowly adding load. And then with 6 months, I was back over 1,000 pounds on the squat. And my training split was like this. It was squat and deadlift on day one, nothing but restorative recovery stuff on day two. A lot of people talk about foam rolling, and I'm not against foam rolling, but I am against people who want to loosen up their back that are trying to be powerlifters, rolling their spine, creating micro movements in their spine when they're trying to be stiff. So my advice to you would be not to roll your lower back. There's other things you can do for your thoracic spine if you need to gain mobility, and we could talk about that. The PNF stretch that we have in Gift of Injury is really good to open up the thoracic spine. But foam rolling your lats, your quads, your hamstrings, your glutes, I have no problem with that. So I would do those things on the off day. I would do some carries. I would do walking. But the second training day that I do after the squat and deadlift would be a bench press day and all my assistance work. And then I'll take a day off. And then day 3 of training would be squat and deadlift assistance work, where I would do all my rowing, my hamstring work, my quad work. It's a little bit more bodybuilding. And then a 4th day I would take after the next day off, I would take, and we called it a fluff and buff is what I call it. And it's basically a bodybuilding workout, circuit training, really light, to kind of hit the details that you may have missed. More core work, more carries, light bench pressing, light delt work, some more back work, maybe calf work, whatever it is I need to do to kind of finish out the week. And then I'd take another day off, and then it would be time to start the cycle all over again.
Yeah.
And the big thing was going forward is I listened to my body, and I didn't get too greedy. I took what I could, and then I backed off. I never crossed that tipping point again, because all it takes is one extra set, one extra heavy rep with bad form. So when I came back, I only went with singles. That's another thing that I did.
Okay.
I went with multiple singles, 1 rep at a time. That way I could keep that perfect form.
Yeah. Interesting. That's the thing that, I've found when people have come back from an injury, that sometimes they might try and push it a little bit, and then all of a sudden they've just taken 2 steps back, just being like what you said, just being greedy. Mentioned there about about foam rolling the spine or foam rolling your lower back, and there's other exercises that you can use. When you're talking about stiffness and mobility, is there any go-tos that you recommend, and is there exercises or mobility exercises that you would recommend for powerlifters to stay away from? Because you'll see some people doing foam rolling exercises when really, obviously, like what we've mentioned here, the whole point is to create stiffness, not to, spend hours foam rolling on something that, you could spend use your time better.
Yeah, I would definitely stay away from those silly stretches, as Stu calls them, to stretch the lumbar spine to make it more mobile if you're trying to be an athlete. The McGill 3, obviously, to stiffen. Stir the pot is another go-to for me. That's a great exercise. Yeah. Any kind of a suitcase carry, and then a progression from there is a bottoms-up carry. Then you can do a bottoms-up overhead, and then you can do a bottoms-up overhead with a march, a backwards march. There's a lot of things you can do to challenge that core. Regular planks and variations of regular planks are another good one that I like to use. But those are my core go-tos. Stir the pot, McGill 3 carries for the stiffness. And then something that's actually underrated for the core stiffness is walking. Walking with jaunty strides, swinging the arms, keeping the core nice and stiff, and then moving about the ball and socket is another good way to naturally traction the spine. Stu calls it nature's back palm. And there's just so many good things that come. You have good cardiac work that tends to, come with walking. So you need to exercise your heart, right? Get the heart rate up and walk. So walking is very underrated, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting. Just 2 sort of points from that, but I'll touch on the walking bit just because I've been looking into a little bit of this of myself. And when you mentioned about walking, there are things, yes, going out for a walk and that sort of stuff. But there are sort of walking in the same position with a belt squat or with a band or anything like that. What's your take on that? And just, well, this one's, I've not written this one down, but seeing as though we're on the topic of it, from my own sort of knowledge, if you like, what's your take on that? And would you use that? What's the reasoning behind it?
I like sled drags. As far as the marching, a lot of people do it with the band on the belt squat. I don't know. I don't really know what to think of it. I haven't done a bunch of that myself. But to challenge the core even more with carries and such, I have a march, clients march in particular. But I don't know how I feel about the marching. I'll always tell you if I don't really know or don't really have an opinion on it. I see a lot of people do it and they have good success. They use it to bring up their general physical preparedness. But me personally, I don't have a lot of clients march on the belt squat or do a lot of marching exercises. I do have them do carries and a lot of sled drags and sled pushes.
Yeah. So just on the carry side of that, I know some people are. I think they're an exercise that can be used very well and done well. They can be quite challenging. I think sometimes doing a suitcase carry that they can walk really fast and keep the dumbbell or kettlebell really close to themselves, but actually done properly and slow and controlled can work really well.
When you have them take it to a bottoms up, it makes them really focus on keeping that core stiffness, because any kind of micro movement they have in the torso is going to want to kick that kettlebell to the side.
Yeah, absolutely. Just going back a step, and when you mentioned about when you were able to be pain free and then start focusing on the movements that obviously we've just chatted about, what was the process in terms of getting pain free, and what was the in terms of movements that cause pain and that sort of stuff, what was the process of getting pain free? Because that's where people will, or I found that some people will be too nervous to think, right, well, I've just got pain in my back, so I'm going to avoid everything. So what was the process that you followed?
Well, everyone's pain's different, and the mechanisms of that pain are going to be different. Mine, I was compression and flexion intolerant. So sitting for too long bothered me. Bending bothered me. Load on my back bothered me. So I had to stop lifting. And a lot of people, they can't handle that. And they say, no, I can't stop lifting. Well, as Stu would say, enjoy your injury, because you got to get away from the cause. And if the cause is lifting with bad form, you can't have it both ways. So for me, it was a regimen of moving perfectly, a squat, a deadlift, or a lunge every movement. If I needed to pick up something, I'm using my hips as a squat. If I need to pick up something light, I'm doing a one-legged morning and just kind of bracing myself and going down on one leg and keeping the core nice and stiff, back straight. And then if I need to go tie my shoes, I work into a lunge. So I had to kind of reprogram my movement every day, and Stu harped on me. And that was the biggest thing that was causing my pain every day. And so from there, once I got that under control, I was able to build more capacity and then get back to lifting. From there, I paid more attention to the details and the nuances of form. I had to be perfect every single time. So I would do many singles over and over. Goblet squat, a single, down in the hole, come back up, perfect form. Put it down, back off, think about what I'm doing, come back, do it again, so on and so forth. But there's no magical formula to beating pain. The magical formula is removing the cause and then moving around the pain and building pain-free capacity. I think a lot of people are looking for the magic bullet, that injection, that surgery, that medicine, that drug that's going to cure their pain, and they go on and everything is hunky-dory and everyone lives happily ever after. That's not the way it works. Yeah. And I fell prey to that mindset as well. I thought that I would go get a surgery and get it fixed, or get injections, and then I'd just go about my day. I had to have a behavioral change. Yeah. And that was where Stu came in, and he was almost like an intervention, a movement intervention, if you will. So I had to I went into that meeting in May of 2013 as a complete beginner. And so that's where it starts. So to back up and answer your question, it's about the mindset. You have to wrap your mind around the fact that you may not lift for a while, and you're going to have to move well, and you're going to be cognizant of every position you put yourself in. And so I made sure that I was sitting nice. I'm getting up.
Yeah.
Sitting down nice. I'm not plopping into the chair. I'm sitting nice. I have nice posture. I keep the natural curve of my back, no matter what I'm doing. Those little things add up. Those are dollars in your bank account. Yeah. So guess what? When you put dollars in your bank account, you can pull them out because you have them when you're lifting in the gym.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good analogy to use. And, a point I picked up on there is behaviors, because, like we've covered there, people will just forget about it and not have that conscious, that mindset, like you've mentioned, of I need to think about what am I doing, and the example of withdrawals is quite like that. I'll use that for the next for the next powerlifting club.
Very good. Another thing that I'd like to add too is, do you want to know the secret to my success?
Well,
okay, here's the magic bullet. Here's Pandora's box. Consistency. Consistency is the magic with anything. And compliance. Do you follow Stan Efferding at all?
I have seen some of his work. Yeah.
Rhino Rants. Yeah, Stan's a brilliant guy, and he talks about the science is compliance. Compliance to the program, following it with consistency. Many training programs can work. Many rehab programs can work. Many diet plans can work just fine. So can supplements. But if you're only doing it 2 times a week and you're supposed to be doing it 6, it's not going to work.
Yeah.
So you have people that get complacent and lazy after a while. When they get rid of their pain, they go back to their old habits, because you know what? Old habits are very comfortable, and there's something about comfort that we like. We don't like being uneasy. We don't like being tested and pushed, right? Getting out of our comfort zone. So I think that the biggest thing for me is moving well here 6+ years later, and not going back to my old habits. I made up my mind that day at the University of Waterloo that I was not going back. I was not going to be the same coach, the same person, the same athlete as I was when I came in. Yeah. And that mindset is what's been the difference maker.
Yeah, that's great to hear, because some people will. I've had people before, you've heard of people before, that they'll do a week or a couple of weeks of rehab, if you like, and then they'll say, "Oh, can I go back to lifting now?" It's like, no, it's, you've got to put the work in, and consistency is the, I think when everyone, it was a good example there, saying what's the magic bullet, if you like. Just kiss the consistency, keep doing everything over and over again. What I'll usually say to people is, whether it's from nutrition or from training, one bad meal or one bad session doesn't undo all the good work that you've put in, or all the good food that you've had. But equally, one good meal doesn't undo all the bad work that you've done before. Having that consistency going forward is key.
And
from
Darren,
your trade,
Darren Hardy's a business speaker, motivational speaker here in the States. And he had he has something called Darren Daily, where they have a business tip for every day. And one in particular was a really good one that caught my attention. And he talks about priming a well. It's not the big decisions in life that make you successful in life. It's doing the little ones right every day. And that's getting up and going for a walk. That's doing your core work. That's doing your warm up. It's avoiding that bad food and packing your lunch. All those things are not hard to do. They're just tedious. But that's what breeds success over time. It's the little things. It's not making it this huge decision, once a month that is stressful. It's the little things that add up. So he talks about priming it well. Every day, if it's primed, you're not going to have to work that hard to get results. It's ready. But if you have to start over and prime the well and it's not primed, you got to pump on that thing for a long time to start getting results. So if you just maintain it along the way, it's just the little day-to-day activities that you got to focus on.
Yeah, absolutely. All those, a little bit like what we mentioned about when people are competing on the platform, all those little jobs. I think there's a photograph that I quite like, and there's a guy stood on the platform, and there's a load of bricks underneath, and each brick is sort of this is the mobility that he's done. This is the warm-ups that he's done. It's all the bricks basically leading up to build him up to get on to get on that podium. And I think that's a really strong image, and shows people that, look, there is everything behind the scenes, and you've got to do those little steps, do that every day, the small little things to get where to get PBs or lift what you want to do.
Yeah, I agree. It's everyone's human. Yeah. Right. So everyone struggles. Everyone doesn't. They have times where they don't want to cook their eggs in the morning. They'd rather eat McDonald's breakfast or something, right? But that's the easy way out. So you got to make those choices every day. Every day, be cognizant and conscious of what you're doing. And, we all struggle. I have times where I don't want to train. I have times where I don't want to eat good, and I'll eat bad and I won't train for a little while. That gives me a little bit of a reprieve, a little bit of a break to get away from it and then come back even more focused. Yeah. And I think a lot of people that are coming up now in the strength world, it would benefit them to know that we all struggle, and we're not on 100% of the time. We're not focused. I think it's important for people to understand that you can't be on and focused 100% of the time, because everyone's going to get sick of you. Everyone's going to hate you after a while. And I've been there. I was the guy that did nothing but talk about powerlifting for many years. I ran off girlfriends. I tried my best to run off my wife at many times, just because I'm a one-track mind. I'm focused. And that's probably part of the reason why I've been successful in powerlifting. I was successful rehabbing the back, because when I get my mind set on something, I get it done. But that's a double-edged sword. It makes you hard to deal with and other things. Not everything is as simple as lifting a weight, squatting it, benching it, deadlifting. And sometimes it takes a little bit of finesse and a little bit of, not so much brute force to get things done in life. So that's been a lesson that I've learned too. Not everything is about brute force. It's about having tact and delicacy with a lot of things that you do.
Yeah, absolutely. Just following on from what you mentioned there about, just doing things through with brute force, it goes back to form. Some people can, and I suppose that's a better way of looking at it. People can rip a bar off a floor, massive amount of weight, but it looks awful. It doesn't look as though that lift was really comfortable. Yes, I know sometimes that happens in a competition, if it's the final pull and that sort of stuff. But when it's in training, right, let's drop the weight down. Let's focus on that form. And some people will be like, yeah, but I managed to lift that bar up, and it only has a limited amount of time before it's, at some point something's going to give, which obviously we've mentioned throughout this podcast of working on that stiffness, working on form. From the just following on from that as well, from getting pain free and getting back to lifting, and obviously competing afterwards, and lifting afterwards. What are your thoughts on the actual lifespan of powerlifting, and when people have an injury? Obviously, can you come back stronger and progress further, or what's your thoughts on that?
Well, I was able to manage a better coefficient on the all-time, the top 20 best totals of all time. I was fortunate enough to have two of them on there by coefficient, one at 275, and the one that actually came back after the back injury and was higher than my previous best on the ranking list. So you can come back, but you have to be smarter. You have to be smarter about that. The lifespan of a powerlifter typically is only a few years. They'll have a rise and then a fall, and then they're done. And you won't know something. You won't truly know about a lifter until they get hurt and they face adversity. It's easy to be strong when you're healthy and everything's going your way, but everyone's going to have times where they have a bad meet, they bomb out, they go 3 for 9, and I think it's about the resilience and that they can come back and make adjustments. But I see so many people that have a world of talent, they just can't take a step back. There's people that I've worked with that haven't competed before, they can't take a step back and get a little bit weaker so they can get way stronger. And you talked about form going away and being poor on some movements. correcting your form will get you further than just pushing through it using brute force. So ideally, you'd have that person take a step back, hone in their form, and then use that brute force with that good form. And then you have, man, you have a special lifter then when they have brute strength and they start to dial in their form. But the reason why that doesn't happen a lot of the time is because the person with brute strength can't take a step back. That's unfortunate.
Yeah, I think it is sometimes good, that some people will want to dive straight into their next competition, whereas, like what you've said there, sometimes taking a little bit of time off, working on the areas that you need to work on, to then ultimately come back, a little bit stronger. Which, I'm glad that, a lifter and a coach like yourself has been able to mention that. So, I think that
Can I elaborate a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely.
I recommend in my book, I think I might have said it in Gift of Injury too, but in 1020 Life, I lay out ideally what someone would do in the 52 weeks. They would compete no more than 2 times. Yeah. So that way you have 20 weeks to prepare for a meet, 10 weeks off season, 10 weeks pre-contest, 2 times over. And then you have about 12 weeks where you just aren't lifting, you decompress the spine, you let everything heal. So for 5 or 10 weeks after a meet, depending on what your schedule is, not putting a bar on your back, not putting a bar in your hands, not pulling from the floor, and just letting your body heal, spending more time with your family, your friends in the off season. Because again, going back to what I said earlier, eventually everyone gets kind of sick of your obsession. So it's a good outlet for those around you to go enjoy yourself a little bit. But again, you've got to do the little things when you're taking that downtime. Are you walking good? Are you going to turn into an obese person? You're going to get too fat, too heavy for your weight class. So everything's about a balance, and that sounds cliche, but it really is. And I'm learning that more and more. I'll be 38 in 2 weeks. So I know a lot more at 38 almost than I did at 28. I thought I knew a lot at 28. I didn't know anything.
Yeah, I'm trying to learn from coaches such as yourself, and it fills me with confidence that the fact that I am only competing twice this year, from what you've mentioned there, and I'm actually looking forward to, after competing in the middle of the year, I'll be competing at the British at the end of this year as well, and then actually I've got a couple of weeks holiday in America, so it'll be good to have a little bit of recovery and downtime, which like what you mentioned there, it is important to find balance, rather than having that one-track mind, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but can sometimes lead to injuries or negative aspects, if you like.
Okay, where are you coming to in the States?
So I'm in New York for a couple of days, and then I'm actually in Florida.
Oh, really? What part of Florida?
So flying into Orlando, and the place that we're staying at, it's actually my girlfriend's uncle, and I can't think of the name. It's not far away from Orlando, so I'm not 100% sure.
I'm only about 2 hours away from Orlando, so if you want to hit me up and come see the gym and get a session in, let me know.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because you were talking about your home gym. So when I eventually buy a house, that's something that I'll aspire to replicate.
Yeah, I've enjoyed building it. It's been something that I figured I'd have eventually, but I just wasn't sure when. Yeah. And like I said, for the longest time, for 15 years, we had a facility at my friend's house, so I didn't need to build a gym.
Yeah,
I could use that within reason for my clients and people coming into town, but after a while, I realized that I needed my own gym instead of going to my friend's house to use it. I needed my own gym to work. And then the gym went away because my friend's selling his house. So it kind of just came together where initially I wanted to keep training at my friend's house and have my own facility for my clients. Well, it ended up me creating a super gym in my garage and using it for both.
Yeah, awesome. So obviously we covered quite a lot of topics on there. For everyone listening who has either had an injury or, like what we've mentioned, that they might not be doing a warm-up, and are just going through the motions, what would be your take-home points or words of wisdom from everything that we've chatted through today?
Yeah, I would suggest they, for one, read The Vertical Diet by Stan Efferding. That's a great resource for recovery and nutrition, supplementation, hydration. He talks a lot about just recovery and eating enough of the micronutrients from your food, not from vitamins and supplements.
Yeah.
I definitely suggest they read Ultimate Back Fitness by Stu McGill, Back Mechanic by Stu McGill, especially if they have a back injury. And then for an athlete looking to overcome injury of any kind, specifically back, that especially, they should read Gift of Injury, so they can see the process and how to take a step back and then build capacity going forward. But as far as advice, besides reading those books, which I really believe in and I reference very often, I go back and read all the time.
Yeah.
Have patience. And that's, again, it's another cliche thing to say, but it does come down to being patient and not forcing things. So people that are dealing with injury, don't be afraid to take time off. Don't be afraid to take a day off if it's not feeling right. If things aren't feeling right when you're warming up and you have kind of a weird feeling about how things are going, you got to kind of decide if it's worth it to go forward. Some days it may be worth it if you have a meet coming up, or you're, like you said, the last deadlift of the day after 8 heavy lifts. That form is probably going to degrade a little bit on that last deadlift. And that's a little more acceptable than one of your warm-ups going to crap, in a regular training session. So pick your battles. I think that's one way we could summarize that. Pick your battles, and it's not everything's worth winning and proving people wrong. You got to pick your times where you do that. Being patient, having downtime, surrounding yourself with people that are experts in their field. So that means if you have a back issue, you look at Stu McGill, you look at myself, Ed Cambridge. You seek us out and we'll help you. If you have shoulder stuff, Eric Cressy is really good with shoulder stuff. Andrew Locke's really good with shoulder stuff. There's a lot of people that you need to seek out, and don't just look for the local Yahoo that is supposedly the chiropractor expert to the stars. Seek out people with real validity, not just a name.
Yeah, some great points to finish on there. I've really enjoyed chatting with you and the topics that we've covered there. For everyone listening who might want to see the content that you put out there, or follow the work that you do, where can people find you or get in touch with you?
Yeah, they can get in touch with me from my email address. That's brian@powerrackstrength.com, POWERRACKSTRENGTH.com. And then I have my articles there. I have quite a few other podcasts and interviews there. This one's going to go there as well whenever it's up.
Awesome.
And they can get a hold of me there. I have my articles. I've also written 10/20 Life, Gift of Injury, and a book called Cutting Weight. It's an athlete's guide to making weight. All those are available on powerrackstrength.com and Amazon, as well as BackFit Pro and a few other retailers, thankfully. But that's how you can find me. I'm on Instagram and Facebook, Brian Carroll 81. I don't really do much on Twitter, but I'll answer questions when I get DMs, but it's best to email me so I see them. And I really appreciate you having me on, Stephen. I've enjoyed this talk, and it's felt like just a normal Skype conversation that's been recorded. I've enjoyed talking about these things, and I can't overemphasize the patience and being strategic with everything that you do.
Yeah, no worries at all. It was really good chatting with you. From seeing the work that you've done and the books that you've done, books that you've written. For everyone listening, I 100% recommend going and checking them out, and reading them, because ultimately, you will benefit a lot from it. I think it's a great point that I recommend to the people that I train and the lifters that I work with, that it is about patience and consistency, and it reaffirms to me that someone such as yourself saying those same things, I aren't going too far wrong. So thanks a lot for taking the time to chat with me. Thanks a lot for everyone listening, and I will see you all next week.
Thank you.